Story 1. I worked at McDonald's in high school. A kid took the cash drawer, jumped the counter, and ran on his first day. He had completed all his paperwork with his real name and address. Story 2. A new driver and guard at an armored car company returned from her first route. When the person checking her in asked where a missing bag of money was, she revealed she had been hiding it in her jacket. Contained only $1,200. Story 3. He got caught using the trainer's identification badge to access a printer and make copies of a prescription pad he had stolen from a doctor. He wanted to hook people up at his new office. This happened on day 3 of training, and everyone was already sketched out by his unhinged comments and behavior leading up to it, so it did not really surprise anyone. Story 4. A new employee on his first day complained of a toothache. Our on-site medical team does not provide dental care, so they offered to fly him back to Perth to see a dentist. He accepted but then became unresponsive. He did not answer calls, texts, or emails. After a couple of weeks, it was assumed he had abandoned his employment and he was formally terminated. A few months later, a supervisor received an email from him apologizing and explaining that he had to serve time in prison and asking if he could return to work. Story 5. One of my first jobs was at an amusement park. On the first day, we had a meet and greet to break the ice and get to know who we would be working with for the season. Our team lead walked off to grab some paperwork, so we had an opportunity for a candid conversation. Immediately after she left, one of my coworkers bragged about using his brother's urine to pass the drug test. The next day he was gone. The kicker is none of us reported him. He did it to himself. He was so proud of his feat that he also bragged about it on Facebook shortly after accepting a friend request from one of the park's social media accounts. He must have been high 24 hours a day to not realize how foolish that was. Story 6. A 20-year-old at a gas station sold beer to himself overnight at half price. Dumb move. Story 7. Technically, he had been with the company for a while, but he was fired within a week of working in our office. He was a bit eccentric. He wore what I could only describe as English country gentleman attire to work and smoked a pipe. He had been sent to our office to hot desk for some reason. As the week went on, he seemed to become more and more tense until Thursday afternoon, when security came in and frog-marched him out of the office while the senior manager apologized for the disruption. We then saw him arrested outside, bundled into a police car, and driven away. It turned out he had been selling handguns and other weapons illegally using his work email account. According to the security guard I spoke with, they had been monitoring him for some time. Story 8. On his first day, an intern opened the door to a room where several senior staff were holding an important meeting. He briefly lifted his leg, farted, and walked away laughing. He was fired on the spot. Story 9. Management frowned upon him showing up drunk on his first day as a truck driver, even before he clocked in. Story 10. I worked at a rental car company during the winter. On the new detailer's first day, he refused to clean snow off cars and was fired within 15 minutes of showing up. Story 11. I work in information technology. At my last job, an older man around 50 to 60 years old lied extensively on his resume and during his interview. He was hired for a position in the finance department. We set up his equipment at his desk, and I met him on his first day. It was obvious. He knew nothing about using computers. He could not open Microsoft Outlook, use Microsoft Excel, or use any of the Microsoft Office applications, and he seemed completely lost in front of his computer. His new manager realized this as well, and he was let go before noon on his first day. Fastest turnaround I have ever seen in my career. Story 12. I worked at a strip club. A girl came in to audition and did great. She came back the next day for her first shift and brought a man no one knew was her boyfriend. He tried to fight the first patron who put money in her thong during her first song, before she had taken anything off. She lasted about 3 minutes into her shift. Story 13. He came to work recklessly swerving in the parking lot and almost hit 3 coworkers. When confronted, he smirked and said, "Fuck him." Story 14. 3 days later. The new nurse did not want to be transferred to another area after 2 people called out and began yelling at the nurse manager. The nurse manager's regional manager was visiting that day, so she approached the shouting nurse and said, "Your manager asked you to please work in Building 3 today. Please pack up your things and go to Building 3. The new nurse replied, "Who the fuck are you? Get out of my face." The nurse was fired by the regional nurse manager and escorted out by security 20 minutes later. Story 15. New barman. Started work at 11 a.m., helped himself to drinks behind the bar. Called a regular a cunt. Told people the food was not great. Flirted with the manager's wife. Was caught ringing up half pints instead of pints and pocketing the difference. Left at 12:30 p.m. Story 16. I work in information technology, and we had a new employee starting on our customer service team. I met with all new employees to complete their onboarding. We were walking through signing into everything when a female colleague came into my office to get a mouse. The new employee stood up, told her he had a mouse for her, and gestured toward his crotch. I immediately messaged human resources. They arrived with security and escorted him out. He had been there about 25 minutes. Story 17. An email on Friday from the boss said, "Let's welcome Mary back on Monday from her maternity leave." On Monday at 8:10 a.m., Mary was crying and saying goodbye to everyone. She was laid off by the same boss as soon as she arrived at the office. Story 18. My husband got a friend an interview at the place where he worked. The friend's interview went well and he was hired. He was excited and did a donut in the large gravel parking lot. They called him immediately and told him his behavior was unacceptable and not to report for work. Story 19. I worked in a bar and casual restaurant, and we had to let a man go on his first shift. He decided it was a good idea to drink all the leftovers from the glasses that came back to the bar before we washed them. Story 20. He crashed the company car while reversing out of the garage and lied about it. It left a small dent and the incident was caught on camera. When I asked him if he wanted to change his statement, he accused me of calling him a liar. It was his second day on the job. The worst part was that his wife was friends with my then girlfriend, and he told everyone I had it out for him. Don't do favors for friends, I guess. Story 21. About 5 days. I was working groundskeeping for a cemetery and memorial garden. The owner hired his nephew's company to lay polyvinyl chloride pipe to extend a water hookup 200 yards to a new hand pump. It was not a hard job. The pump was literally straight downhill. Dig, grade, lay. The nephew did the work, then told the owner there was not enough water pressure from the water company to execute the job. The owner fired him but did not ask for his payment back, about $2,000. We, two workers making $10 an hour, dug it up and found he had somehow graded it almost 10 degrees uphill. You could see it was slanted. Story 22. A regular at my bar came in and ordered his usual, a beer and a shot. I served him 3 rounds over about an hour and a half. Then my business partner's wife came in and asked if he was ready to start his training. He had been hired as a bartender without my knowledge and started his first shift 6 deep. I did not rat him out. He lasted about 10 minutes before she asked why he smelled like Evan Williams. He then dropped a beer into the ice well on his first pour. 10 minutes is one of the fastest I have seen. Story 23. A new maintenance worker reported for work at a large private school. A couple of hours later, he was sent to the music department to fix some minor issues. He opened the refrigerator, found a few bottles of wine left over from a performance and drank some. He passed out on the floor. When a female teacher found him, she screamed in alarm because she thought he had died on the job. He woke up, screamed, and ran home. He was fired by phone later that day. Story 24. We had a chef show up for a trial week and he was assigned to desserts. On the first night, he drank a whole bottle of Malibu intended for the fruit cocktail and was sent home for being intoxicated. The following morning, he arrived early for work and had no memory of being dismissed the night before. Story 25. We had a morning toolbox talk to introduce the new guy. The boss made an announcement, introduced him, explained what he would be doing, and asked the new guy to say a few words. He got up, and the first words out of this guy's mouth were, "Morning cunts." The boss interjected, said, "You know what? Don't bother," and told him to leave immediately. We all just sat there like stunned mullets. Story 26. I work in a call center and have been there for several years. As managers, we introduced ourselves to new hire classes on the second or third day, and there was always at least one person who had to be the loudmouth. After we introduced ourselves, the department manager asked the trainer what they were covering that day. The trainer said they were discussing difficult customers. Mr. Loudmouth spoke up and said, "If someone starts being a jerk with me, I'll tell them I know where they live and will pay them a visit. I have a trunk full of guns that will make them start being nice." Another new hire said, a bit sheepishly, that he really did. We made light of it, but after we left the classroom, our manager said we needed to do something. She emailed the trainer, who brought the person in the class to her office. After some questions, it turned out that Mr. Loudmouth did have several guns in his trunk and had been proudly talking about them and showing them to classmates. Our manager called the local police department. Officers made him open his trunk. He had several rifles and handguns and was immediately fired for bringing firearms onto company property and threatening to use customer information to cause harm. Story 27. I work for a towboat company that pushes barges. We hired a deckhand who was picked up at our dock. It was my job to train him, so we brought him on board, got his gear squared away, and gave him a tour. After he signed his initial paperwork, we started the engines and departed for the fleet where the barges are kept. As we turned into the cut where our fleet is, the boat leaned slightly and water splashed onto the deck. That sent him into a panic. He was in the galley, sitting in the corner, crying and screaming, "Get me off of here." We went to the back of the fleet, called the office, and they sent someone over in a truck. He got off the boat. He lasted about 45 minutes from the time he stepped on board until he got off. It turned out he was afraid of water and had thought it would be okay because the boats are big and stable. Story 28. I am a cabinet maker. My boss hired a tradesman while I was still an apprentice. He had worked in a factory his whole career and did not know how to install a cabinet properly. So I had to show him. He once disappeared for an hour and a half for lunch when we only had 30-minute breaks. He was an alcoholic and I often caught him drinking on the job. He would not show up for work even when we came to his door at 7:30 a.m. to pick him up for the site. He had a good deal with us. His previous employers were not paying him properly and had not taught him the trade. I was running things as a second-year apprentice. He could have learned a lot and would have been paid fairly, but his personal life caught up with him and he could not handle it. He lasted about 3 weeks before my boss sacked him. He was so out of it that he left half his tools behind and never returned to collect them. I hope he cleaned himself up and got back on his feet because he was a good guy otherwise. Story 29. Not sure if this counts, but when I stepped off the bus at boot camp, the man next to me froze and did not respond to anyone. He went catatonic. The drill instructors went from yelling to calling medical. They loaded him on a stretcher. He was taken away by ambulance and never seen again. Story 30. While working in a warehouse, I saw a hippie woman who had been hired sight unseen through a temporary agency arrive barefoot. Astelnup. Story 31. She punched a customer who was holding a baby near the registers in the Kohl's department store where we worked. Story 32. About 2 hours into his first day with our window washing company, a new hire ran away. He was a young Asian man, maybe about 20 years old, who seemed eager to work but severely underestimated how physically demanding window washing is. That day we were a crew of 6, cleaning a fairly nice home in Beverly Hills with large windows. After about 90 minutes he asked how much longer we'd be working. I told him about 5 more hours. He said he was going to the work van to get his Gatorade, and when I looked back over my shoulder he had taken off in a full sprint down the street and never came back. At $20 an hour I do not blame him. It was very hard work and we were being paid cash under the table. Most of the people working for that company did not have legal status. Story 33. I sat him down and welcomed him to the company. During the orientation, my colleagues and I emphasized that smoking and vaping are prohibited in the building. It is a big deal and we have signs everywhere stating that. I gave examples of why it is prohibited and sent him on a 15-minute break. The boss walked into a cloud of vape smoke in the bathroom. When I asked him, his response was, "I was in the bathroom." It is a private area. You cannot tell me what I can do in a bathroom stall. I walked him out of the building. He lasted 2 hours and earned 2 hours pay at a decent rate for our area. Story 34. We had a new employee and a company happy hour that evening. It was casual, mainly to make an appearance for the executives since the company was paying, and maybe have a drink or two. She clearly had a drinking problem and treated it like a free-for-all. She kept ordering mostly shots. She sat at our table and tried to order drinks for us. We declined, so she downed 3 shots each time. I moved away quickly. Within an hour and a half she was dancing on the table, had stripped to her bra, and tried to kiss one of our married bosses. They put the charges on her own tab and called a cab. The next day we saw her leaving with a box of personal items, looking very hungover. One coworker knew her and later said she went to rehab about 6 months after and has been sober for a couple of years. Story 35. It lasted less than 2 hours. I worked at the technical support center for a large multinational corporation. We were employed by a vendor that provided services to the company. One man was hired as a general support technician along with 3 other new employees. During onboarding training, he sexually harassed one of our trainers. He repeatedly tried to look down her blouse. At one point, he put his arm around her, leaned in with his mouth next to her ear, and suggested they find a private place together during the next break. Story 36. A coworker and I worked the second shift at a bar where I still work. After our shift, he relapsed on cocaine in the bathroom, was fired, and later overdosed and died from a heart attack caused by mixing cocaine with anabolic steroids. Story 37. We eliminated the position of one of our longtime employees. She was difficult and frequently filed human resources complaints about perfume smells, coworkers wearing sandals that made flapping sounds, radios being too loud, and other petty issues. None of these were terminable offenses, but we needed to remove her, and part of the separation agreement was a 40-week severance package. The terminated employee's manager was relatively new. Immediately after the termination, our vice president told him to contact the information technology security team to obtain access to the employee's email, private directories, and instant messages. Later that day, the manager pulled me aside and said they had also fired a longtime female privacy administrator after lunch. When he accessed the terminated employee's instant messages, he found vile exchanges between the 2 women, who were close friends. They used offensive and racist nicknames for him and other managers and vice presidents, and all of it was on a company asset. Our vice president was furious that she had not reviewed those instant messages before terminating the employee and approving a $56,000 severance, because the privacy administrator could have been fired for cause and the company could have saved a significant amount. Story 38. A group home for residents with disabilities who exhibited violent behavior. Buddy taught a violent teen how to use a lighter to create a hairspray torch. He lasted an hour. Story 39. I still haven't and probably never will know the truth. My niece was fired 45 minutes into her first day at a restaurant. Her mother had to go there and persuade them not to press charges. I suspect it was theft. Her mother repaid them, but the restaurant will not admit it. Story 40. A customer called to report an employee smoking outside the designated smoking area. This facility contains explosive dust, so I explained the seriousness of the action. The employee returned the next day and repeated the offense, smoking in an especially hazardous location. I terminated the employee immediately. They acted like a victim and tried to argue, wasting company time. Story 41. 8 of us were in orientation. One recruit cracked a joke and pronounced harassment as harassment. Goodbye, Chuck. We barely knew you. Story 42. I have a distant cousin who never lasts more than a week or 2 at any job. The reason she gives is she doesn't like being told what to do, and since that is essentially what happens during any on-the-job training, she gets mad and leaves. Story 43. A woman was hired as an accountant or finance associate. There were a few weeks between her onboarding packet being mailed and her start date, which gave her time to realize her identity had been stolen. Human Resources fired her when she arrived, and the police also questioned her. Story 44. A new employee had a habit of arriving late for his shift. One day he came 20 minutes late, sat down, and began eating the breakfast he had brought from home. The foreman was enraged, cursed, and called the department chief to deal with him. When the chief arrived, the foreman said, "That guy came 20 minutes late again. And if that wasn't enough, he sits down and eats white bread rolls like he's at home." The new employee protested that the foreman was lying. So the chief said, "Let's hear your side of the story. What's wrong here?" Solemnly, the new employee replied, "It was a corn spitz." He meant it was not a white bread roll but a regional grain roll, more like a small dark loaf. The chief looked puzzled, regained his composure, and went into his office without saying anything. 15 minutes later, the new employee received a call from his temp agency telling him to go home. Story 45. 2 hours later, a Lithuanian trainee was being trained by a black man. The man went to get them both coffee, returned and said, "There you go, my Nutella brother." Story 46. I work for an ingredients and flavors company. A new employee lit a cigarette in the bathroom less than 5 minutes after signing the no smoking policy. He did not think we would smell it because of the aroma of our products. He was less than 1 hour into new hire training. Story 47. I fired a person who had been hired to help take care of an invalid relative after 2 hours. I had gone to the store and told her to prepare lunch. No lunch was made. She was on the landline phone the entire time I was gone. She was dismissed without any pay. When I received the phone bill, she had been talking to someone in Poland. Story 48. Second day. I was working retail in about 1998. An 18-year-old man was hired straight out of high school. He graduated on Wednesday and started Thursday, and this happened on Friday. I was helping train him at the customer service desk. He spent the entire shift trying to hack the inventory management system on the computer and get access to a web browser. He attempted structured query language injections in the search and other techniques. Half the time he had the process manager, not the company software, on screen. Possibly because most of the rest of us were women, he assumed we were computer illiterate and would not notice what he was doing. He was wrong. He was also not a very good hacker. As I recall, all you had to do was open the release notes in the system, which opened a text file in Notepad, and then try to open an executable file in Notepad. He was let go just before lunch. Story 49. I know a guy who crashed a forklift into the workshop wall on his first day. Story 50. I work in healthcare. I cannot explain the circumstances, but a colleague took a picture of a patient's genital area after working independently for 1 week and was forced to resign because she could not explain why. During onboarding and shadowing, she did not have the expertise she claimed. When working alone, she had no idea what she was doing. Story 51. My sister works in a pharmacy. A new technician was fired on day 3 for stealing oxycodone and blaming it on her. False accusations do not get you very far when the entire workplace is recorded by security cameras. Story 52. On day 3, she was targeted by scammers. They searched LinkedIn for new hires. They emailed pretending to be the chief executive officer. She was duped into sending about $1,500 in gift card codes to the scammers. We reimbursed her and fired her, technically for poor judgment and inadequate critical thinking. Later, we debated whether she was actually part of the scam. It seems like four-dimensional chess. Pretend to be looking for an entry-level office job, get hired, then claim to have been scammed to require reimbursement. One could even create a system of fake reference employers and coworkers. Story 53. I hired a chef. On his second day, he told me he was vegan and would not touch any meat. That was his last shift. Story 54. This is not my story, but it happened to a friend. Orientation was entirely virtual because of coronavirus disease 2019. On the first day, one of the women forgot she was on mute and talked to her boyfriend about working with the Jew bags. Anti-Semitism is never acceptable, and it is especially inadvisable when you work at an investment banking firm in New York City. She was removed from the system by the second day of orientation. Story 55. About 3 to 4 hours. During the training, the trainer realized that she could barely speak English. This position was for first-line business telecom fault reporting. It transpired that someone had interviewed on her behalf. Story 56. We started the job together. He claimed to be much more experienced than he appeared. I was honest. I only halfway knew the job, but the boss said I clearly knew it better than he did. A few days in, he came back from lunch smelling of marijuana. He was fired immediately. You cannot mess around like that when running machines. He did make me look a lot better that first week, though. I hope he found something better and stopped lying and showing up high. For what it is worth, I enjoy smoking marijuana, just not before I clock in to bend metal. Story 57. I work for the American Automobile Association as a tow technician. My supervisor told me that during training a trainee argued that he did not have to wear a seatbelt while driving a flatbed tow truck. He lost that argument. Story 58. I think I answered this before. Within a minute of receiving a job offer, the company often hired students, usually those who shared the last names of our directors and senior managers. A young man was offered a well-paying landscaping job for the summer. After congratulating him, the hiring manager told him to report at 8 a.m. next Monday at a specific location. He told the hiring manager he did not like early mornings and would arrive around 9:30 or 10 o'clock, and they could pay him only for the hours he actually worked. He was told no. Those were the terms of employment, and the call ended. His father, a director, tried to smooth things over, but the hiring manager would not hire him after that. And yes, his dad was a bit of an asshat too. Story 59. We had an intern who bragged about taking a 2-hour lunch because no one was in the office that day on Facebook. Story 60. He came in from an agency. He arrived so high that he moved in slow motion. I did not even know he was the new hire. He just showed up, and my boss said, "Make sure he puts that in the right truck." I thought the new hire was a customer because he was taking so much time. He did not last the day for safety reasons. They told me they had called the agency and instructed him to leave by lunchtime. Story 61. In less than 2 hours while I was working in a kitchen, a new employee on his first shift was asked to prepare food for the staff. While cutting up chicken to marinate, he then prepared the staff salad without washing his hands in between, causing cross-contamination. He said he did not believe in bacteria. Story 62. My ex tried to get a job where I worked. They spent the entire interview trash-talking me. The hiring manager thought the accusations were way out of character and asked a few follow-up questions. My ex was never hired and was blacklisted from any property owned by my employer. Actual "you're fired" moments? A new employee accused the black manager of being anti-white when he told her to get off her phone and return to work. She was regularly late. He let other late days go without giving her attendance points, but still had to fire her in week 2. Story 63. Ask, vanish, cooing, strong, safe, fearful, rustic, quiet, tender. Story 64. I only heard about this while I was working in another office. A newly hired coworker was fired within his first week for viewing hentai on his work computer. A person sitting next to him reported him to their manager. The manager came over to confirm and then confronted him. He reportedly said, "But I'm on my break," as if that made it acceptable to view hentai on a work computer in the office around other people. The manager, unsure what to do, spoke to Human Resources. Human Resources asked to meet with the employee. The employee explained he thought it was okay because he was on his break. Human Resources explained the behavior was unacceptable and that the employee would be let go because he was still in his probationary period. It did not end there. The employee demanded to be given a check for time worked on the spot and refused to leave until he received payment. Human Resources and a member of finance explained that pay for time worked would be deposited to his bank account, but the employee began to yell and slam things while demanding immediate payment. Human Resources told him to calm down and leave the office, but he insisted he would only leave once he had his money. Human Resources called building security, who told the employee he had to leave. He again refused, so security warned that the police would be called. The employee continued to refuse, calling security's bluff. Security then called the police, at which point the employee left the office and was never seen again. The material he was viewing was My Little Pony based. Summary. A new employee was caught viewing My Little Pony hentai on his work computer in the office, claimed it was acceptable because he was on break, was informed he would be terminated, demanded immediate payment, became disruptive, and left after security called the police. Story 65. At the first big staff party, 3 days into his employment, he licked the neck of an executive. Story 66. I once heard about a man who was hired and fired at my company within 15 minutes. After a long interview process, he was offered the job. He was very excited, and when he reached the lobby, he said to the receptionist, "I'm so excited. Can I give you a hug?" She replied, "I would prefer that you did not." He then asked, "Can I lick your face?" I was told he received the termination email before his ride arrived. Story 67. On her first day of work, she asked if she could use someone's e-cigarette. When the boss realized there were too many people working, they asked if anyone would like to leave for the day. The woman immediately raised her hand, and on her way out she hit my boss's car. My boss called her to return, and it took about 40 minutes for her to come back. She was fired immediately. Story 68. While being given a tour of the warehouse, he asked how we would find out if inventory went missing, then asked if he could borrow a few items for the weekend and bring them back on Monday. At the end of the tour, he was immediately dismissed. Story 69. Technically, it took a couple of minutes, but it was not an interesting story. I worked at Best Buy in the Geek Squad. They hired a very young employee who grabbed an Apple Watch when they first came out. She did not put it in her purse. She scanned it with her point-of-sale terminal, signed up for AppleCare and the warranty we offered, processed the checkout, and wore it on her second day at work. I had always heard about people getting arrested, but I worked in the back repairing devices and had never seen it. On this occasion, they confiscated her watch and handcuffed her. Story 70. 10 minutes into the job, she walked outside for a cigarette break. We do not allow cigarette breaks at my workplace. She kept walking. The team leader said that if she walked out, she would be fired. Apparently, her cigarettes mattered more to her than the pay she would receive. Story 71. In the first week of training, a police officer in my class was arrested. Apparently, the fingerprints he provided when he joined the force matched those from an unsolved burglary. Story 72. A new coworker, a woman in her 30s, sat next to me, a man in his mid-20s, in the office. She started sending me Microsoft Teams messages with images of underwear she owned, including links to shopping websites. She repeatedly touched my leg and made inappropriate comments, even after I asked her to stop. I reported it to my manager. She was fired the next day, a week after she started. I am glad they took it seriously. Story 73. A new medical assistant lasted less than an hour at my office. We had hired a new medical assistant because the previous one had quit. The new assistant came in and said the doctor had a patient in room 1, which in every office I have worked in means vital signs are done. I went to see the patient, and the vital signs were perfect, literally. A pulse of 72, a temperature of 98.6 degrees, and a blood pressure of 120/80. I did not think much of it. The next 2 patients were the same. The odds against that are simply astronomical. It turned out the new medical assistant was not taking vital signs, but was just writing down numbers and telling me the patients were ready. The new medical assistant did not last until 10 in the morning. Story 74. An employee at the bar was told to restock cans about an hour into his shift. He went to the storage area, opened a can, and drank it inside the refrigerator. He was fired the next day. He was a fraternity member. Story 75. While onboarding with a colleague, I saw a female coworker and said, "Bet she needs to get railed really good." My colleague replied, "That's my twin sister. I'll get you your papers. Please go change." It took less than 10 minutes from entering the facility to standing in the parking lot. Jobless. Story 76. I was working for a large corporation and had a highly anticipated new hire starting. I went down to security to let him into the building and get him a badge. His first words were, "Wow, your husband let you leave this morning in that skirt? He is a lucky man." I looked at the security guard, said never mind, and returned to my office. I am convinced he only needed an accepted offer letter and had no intention of actually working. Story 77. Years ago, I worked for state government. We hired a man who gave everybody strange vibes. He was a former Marine and there was something off about him. For example, he would get on an elevator and stare at you as if he wanted to murder you. He never pressed a button for a floor. If you asked him which floor he wanted, he would look at the floor you were going to and say that was fine. One employee got off and he let the door close behind him. He would ride the elevator to creep people out. He never smiled or cracked jokes. When people introduced themselves, he acted annoyed and responded with one-word answers. But he ended up getting fired. During the 3 days he was employed, he ate lunch alone in his car. One person in their office watched his car move about 6 times from its spot, drive 30 feet to a dumpster, then park again. This happened every 10 minutes for about an hour. At the end of lunch, the observer watched him urinate in the parking lot, even though there were restrooms 40 feet away inside the building. His boss secretly went outside later and looked in the dumpster. It was filled with beer cans. He was fired. Sometime that night, someone broke into the building and smeared feces all over the public restroom walls. Needless to say, no one was sorry to see him go. Story 78. One day I was working as a waiter and he was the chef. It turned out he had recently been released from prison and was struggling with a drug addiction. He did not get along with the staff, and the women felt particularly uncomfortable because he was oddly hyperactive. He ruined the pancake batter, and we had to throw away about 20 kilograms of ingredients. My manager spoke with him and then he left. Story 79. I fired a man on his first day. I took him out to the shop and introduced him to his coworkers. He absolutely refused to work with anyone who was black and would not even speak to them. He did not attempt to hide his hatred. He was the most racist, foul person I have ever met. By Felicia. Story 80. A few years ago, a very sweet young woman joined our team as an office assistant. The job involved basic administrative tasks, such as using Microsoft Excel, scanning and organizing documents, handling emails, and occasionally purchasing office supplies. I did not see her interview, but I saw her curriculum vitae, which indicated a couple of years of experience, and she was hired. On her first day, she arrived at 10. I was responsible for training her. I showed her around and sat her at a desktop computer that had already been set up. The first red flag came when I told her to turn the computer on. She needed my assistance. The process was simple. Press the power button on the tower personal computer and the power button on the bottom of the monitor. I assumed she was nervous or tired and remained patient, keeping light conversation to make her comfortable. I showed her details and instructed her to log on to Microsoft Windows, but she did not realize she had to click the text box to enter her credentials, and then click the arrow or press the enter key to submit. I helped again, but the difficulties continued. She struggled with basic instructions. Opening the file manager, finding locations on the hard disk or the network, and renaming and copying files. She could follow a task while I was demonstrating it, but was unable to repeat it on her own. I asked if she would be more comfortable with a Macintosh computer, thinking she might have more experience with one. She answered, "I don't know, what's that?" I then asked about her previous computer experience. She said, "I have a smartphone. That was it." We continued with difficulty. I had to explain the same tasks repeatedly, and she remained unsure how to proceed. My manager arrived at 2 and asked how the training went. I felt terrible but had to be honest. The job was simple, but there was a lot to do, and the company did not want to provide basic computer training. As a result, she was let go before 3. What baffled us was how she had previously held a similar job, since this was clearly her first time using a computer. Fortunately, I was not the one who had to tell her. She was devastated. Story 81. We hired a woman at a medium-sized retailer as a stalker. I was supposed to train her that morning. Before we started, the rest of the crew and I, about 6 of us, needed to take the recycled cardboard to the dumpster. The dumpster was right outside the door and with everyone. Helping it would take about 2 trips each. After the first trip, she sat down and said, "Women shouldn't have to do this work, so I am not going to do it." I said, "All right, let's go talk to the manager and see if that is acceptable." I walked her to the office and never saw her again. Story 82. One afternoon, a contractor arrived after traveling from another state, landing shortly before the close of business. He was a contractor we had never worked with before and had a rare skill set that matched our specialization. He stopped by the office that afternoon to collect his laptop and get set up, then went back to a hotel and returned the next morning. We had hot desks, but I always arrived first and took my preferred spot. He arrived very early and, as the new person, sat next to his manager. He opened his new laptop and then went to the restroom. As soon as he was out of earshot, the laptop began loudly playing explicit audio. The screen was locked and the volume was turned up. In a panic, I could not silence it. Neither the function key shortcut for mute, the power button, nor closing the lid worked. He returned from the restroom and I dismissed him. He left before anyone else arrived, and I had to inform a customer that we would be late with the resource. Story 83. One day I fired him. He hit on every woman in the office and threatened another male employee with violence. He behaved erratically and somehow hid it during the interview because I was on vacation when he was hired. I subsequently fired the person who hired him. The whole situation was chaotic. Story 84. The training lasted 3 days. I have a degree in electrical engineering, so it felt unusually short. The new engineer was in his late 30s with a decent technical resume, but had only recently earned his electrical engineering degree. Older people tend to acclimate faster, so that usually works out well. On day 1, we did typical onboarding. On days 2 and 3, we introduced the technical systems. We work in flight simulation, so it's important that everyone understands exactly how the systems operate. This person randomly pushed buttons without being prompted. Not a big deal, but we always tell people not to press the emergency stop button. A minute later, he pressed the emergency stop. He apologized, we reset the system, and mistakes happen. As soon as it was back up, we asked him to test the touchscreens. He immediately pressed the emergency stop again. He denied it, but there was no other way the power would suddenly drop. On day 3, we took him back in and joked about being careful around the emergency stop button. He laughed and we continued training. He asked if he could try flying the simulator. We said yes. He sat in the pilot seat, ran his fingers over the controls to get situated, found the emergency stop at the pedestal bottom, and pressed it. My coworker got angry, removed him, and sent him down the hall. The new engineer seemed very embarrassed. My coworker and I reset the simulator. A different engineer felt bad for him, decided everyone makes mistakes, and began training him on another simulator. He pressed the emergency stop within 5 minutes and looked like he was on the verge of tears. 2 of us explained the situation to management. No one, including the new engineer, could explain what was happening, and he was let go on the spot. Possibly obsessive-compulsive disorder. I felt bad for him, but he needs to get that issue sorted out. Story 85. A friend owned a luxury car showroom. He hired an employee who decided to take a GTR for a ride around the block before he even started cleaning it. The car spun out of control and crashed into a sidewalk, damaging the bumper. He was fired immediately, and my friend's insurance company is pursuing him. Story 86. A new manager hired a 6-person crew. We were short on labor, so although we could not get them drug tested for a week, we onboarded them and spent 5 days of intense training because the manager personally vouched for them. Everyone failed the drug test. 7 people quickly lost their jobs. Another time, a temporary worker stole my lunch from the fridge, which I had brought from home and labeled with my name, then gave a wink and a finger gun gesture to the camera. It was his first and last day. We had provided lunch for them. The staffing agency asked for a reason, so I reported theft. They probed further and said it was just some food and you cannot fire him for that. I explained that if I cannot trust him with a sandwich and a soda, I certainly cannot trust him with our tools. Story 87. It happened on her very first day, within a few hours, in fact. A woman was hired at the small company where I worked. It was a typical office for about 30 employees, with a single small break room at the center. I was only 16 at the time and was eating lunch with a few others when the vending machine ate someone's money by almost dispensing their chips. They tried the usual gentle tap on the glass and reached their arm inside, but it was futile. The new employee came in to see this. She was enormous, very tall with broad shoulders. She barked at everyone present, "Out!" then slowly closed the doors to the room. I can only attest to what I heard, but I think she grabbed the machine and shook it back and forth, jostling it so violently that people's heads started to emerge from cubicle bays like gophers. A minute later, she emerged triumphantly with the bag of chips, smiling. My boss was already moving through the small group of whispering people who had timidly gathered. My boss escorted the victorious woman to the office and shortly afterward out the front door. I had never seen anything like it in my life. Story 88. I let someone go after their first shift when I was managing a brewery. A new hire was brought on as a server by one of my assistant managers. I firmly believe in leading from the front, so I almost always wore a branded t-shirt rather than a button-up or anything fancy. I think the highest paid in a company should be the busiest, so I always bussed tables or did dishes when I did not have office work. This guy had finished his first shift before I arrived and was at the bar having a beer. It was slammed, so I went behind the bar to help bar back. And he started making fun of my baby blue chinos. The bartender tried to hint to him to chill out, and he said something like, "Oh, it's just the busser." I had his final check waiting for him when he came in for his next shift. If he had known I was the manager and was just negging to fit in, I would not have minded. But making fun of staff you think are below you because you were hired as a server, and then only apologizing when you realized I was the boss is unacceptable. Now, that is slimy behavior. Story 89. At one office job, a new employee completed 2 training shifts and then went on vacation to Israel. She had planned the trip before being hired but did not tell my boss during the interview that she would be gone for a week. She had been hired part-time for the busy season and never returned for a regular shift. I ended up working double shifts and overtime because the person who was supposed to relieve some of my workload was no longer employed. Story 90. The new hire showed up for his first shift high and smelling of marijuana. Because he was high, he could not figure out how the time clock worked and could not clock in. He walked into the office to ask for help with clocking in, and the boss was there. The boss smelled him and immediately fired him for arriving high. It took less than 10 minutes from when he tried to clock in to when he was escorted out. Story 91. New person arrived on time at 7 o'clock in the morning. Just after 11 o'clock he said, "I can't be fucked," and walked out. "Ich remember how es last wird's. Ich bin jetzt weg, es scheißt mich an." Story 92. A man complained on his first day that this kind of work was beneath him and that he had fought with many bosses. He said he would do the job for at least 6 months, but he was there for only 1 day. Story 93. Not as bad as many stories here, but I used to work in a restaurant and the new dishwasher I was training, Austin, got fired halfway through his second shift. He refused to do assigned work. I showed him how to change the soap but did not actually do it so he would learn. It was a simple 3-step process. I told him to change the soap while I used the restroom. I came back 60 seconds later and he was standing there staring at the cooks, the full bottle of soap still on the counter. I asked why it had not been changed and he did not respond. He did start doing some work on his second shift, and dishwashing is not exactly rocket science. Within 30 minutes, I had taught him essentially everything about the position. My manager cut me early to let Austin take over. When I returned for my next shift, my manager told me that he had fired Austin. At the end of the night, the line cooks disassemble parts of kitchen machines, and the dishwasher must scrub, wash, and replace the parts. My manager was taking care of other things, and when he checked on Austin, who had been shown and told exactly what to do with those kitchen parts, Austin was again standing there staring at other people working. Dirty dishes and kitchen parts were stacked so high that they nearly hit him. My manager asked why he was not washing dishes. Austin shrugged and said that he did not want to do it. My manager obliged and fired him on the spot. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.